no thing physical is experienced subjectively, and no thing non-physical is experienced objectively. So what this puts an emphasis on is, let's go ahead and write subjective and objective down here. Make sure we're still being clear on that these have a semi-contiguous meaning, even though that also has its own distinction. No thing physical is experienced subjectively, meaning, given that the objective frame of reference is of the physical and makes reference of the physical, though there are subjective attributes to what is being objectively observed, no subjective or non-physical attribute is observable in the objective physical frame of reference. No thing physical is experienced subjectively, meaning that though we can have thoughts about our objective references of experiences, these subjective thoughts are not physical attributes. They are non-physical attributes. Us experiencing life through our subjective and objective frame of reference is our link to existence. And existence linked to us is through our objective and subjective frames of reference. So the fact that I do exist here is the objective link to the subjective. So experience is the link of the subjective to the objective through my experience, through me, and existence is the objective link to the subjective. So that I exist is the link between this objective frame of reference to my subjective. Again, this is just to more tightly weave these concepts together to ultimately build a coordinate system from them. So, in a sense, we're going to allow this eraser to have its own experience, if you will. What's the experience of being an eraser? Simply that subjective and objective frame of reference that are linked together such that they maintain the existence of this eraser. It's that simple. It doesn't require that we are projecting the idea that this eraser has thoughts or feelings or a soul. Rather, where thoughts, feelings, and or a soul would be attached to something like us that has a body and obviously much more complicated forms that we express and understand, clearly something like us is more capable of something like a soul. But that's because we have the container that an eraser also has for where a soul would be housed. And again, that is just the more non-physical subjective attributes or frame of reference of something such as an eraser. Experience is the relationship between observation and existence. So here we are reducing the emphasis on subjective, personal experience so that we can now refer to it as something more along the lines of observation generally, rather than specifically as a concept such as consciousness. Observation is the relationship between the observer and that which is being observed. Observation is experienced through subjective and objective frames of reference. Something is subjectively observant of something else being objectively experienced. So what that is a distinction between, I'm standing here and I'm looking at this chalkboard and I'm experiencing looking at this chalkboard. So my objective frame of reference of looking at this chalkboard and my subjective experience of looking at this chalkboard are different. For something to be observant, it must have both subjective and objective frames of reference. Also, for something to be observed, it must have both subjective and objective frames of reference. So we're going to go ahead, and this comes up in a little bit, but we're going to go ahead and make this point now because this is an easy place to do it. We're going to let all observers and all things that are able to be observed have the property of both being able to be an observer and being able to be something that is observed. So for instance, though we know that this chalk eraser has no feelings or thoughts, I know, and we're going to go ahead and give it the frames of reference as though it does. So it's sort of like this thing's looking at me. So it's got this objective frame of reference of me, and it has its own subjective reference of itself. And I'm making an objective, reference of it, and I've got my own subjective frame of reference of myself. So that is just so that there is a symmetry between me as an object and it as an object, my ability to observe it and affect it, and its ability to touch me and affect me. So here we are making a link, if you will, between observation and observation. Making the observation and the observation that is being made, but separating them and distinguishing them between objective and subjective, more physical, more non-physical attributes of the same quality. So again, I'm tightly weaving these things to the point where I may even be stumbling over some of my own meanings. However, all of this can be clarified and becomes much more clear as we lay this out. For subjective and objective frames of reference to exist, there must be an observer and something to be observed. All things that exist have and exist within both subjective and objective frames of reference. Observation is within and without everything in existence. So see, I can observe the chalk eraser. Very likely the chalk eraser cannot observe me. However, to use a mathematics where my observation means something or has an effect on things, by allowing the chalk eraser to have both the subjective and frames of reference as though it can, and by allowing me to have frames of both objective and frames of reference as though I can, it allows me to affect it and it to respond to that effect through a symmetry of coordinate systems that relate to physical and non-physical, subjective and objective.